This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta. Chapter 3. The City of Bridges, Milvian Crossing. Gilorn looked around. Flavor was in the middle of a great and rousing speech about how the southern deserts were now for the kingdom to do whatever they wanted, and it was all because of the troops massed before him. There was a great cheer at this, but Flavor raised his hands to quieten them. Delivering a speech to an army was harder than history books stated. Flavor was only one man, and he was talking to several thousands. Only the front half of the Front Legion had any chance of hearing the speech, and it was their reaction that would determine the direction the army would take. After the men quietened down, Flavor continued. But the blood we have shed here today is nothing to the unworthy politicians who hoard wealth and land for themselves. This victory is yours, not theirs, yet they prosper from it. Outrage ensued. Not today. I will use my political office to bring change and reward you for your bravery, but I can only do so with your help. Will you march with me to the Villum, to the Marble City, to the Citadel itself? Will you help me save the kingdom? The men roared their affirmation. Then let it be done. Today we march. 4 days later, Flavor's army had encamped by the river Milvian, on the boundary of the eastern half of the Bridge City, the fortress side of the great yet underutilized city. The walls were huge, and clearly the only new parts of the fortress. The gates were equally magnificent, 10 feet of solid oak with iron bars. The majority of the interior of the city was reserved for empty space, the courtyards being cleared of debris and structures that were deemed unnecessary in terms of military value. The open space favoured the tactics of the Kingdom Army, as it allowed the battalions of troops the ability to get into their formations and maintain them. Formations like shield wall and phalanx allowed the Kingdom infantry to maximise their defence capabilities, but these formations could only ever operate effectively in these open spaces. It was the main reason why the Woodland province was so contested, as the woodland area prevented the troops from getting into formation and made them vulnerable to ambushes. These tactics served the kingdom well against the undisciplined warbands of the Orcs, the barbarian hordes, and more recently, the armies of the south. The western half of the city, which was much more impressive, represented a more economical aspect to a city. The forum of the city and the docks had been prioritised to allow trade along the river to the harbour city and the seaward. The idea being that the Bridge City was rarely going to be attacked from the west, since the Marble City and the rest of the kingdom stood watch, so any threat from the city would come from the east, or from the river. The fortifications had long held up to the challenge of raiders and orcs, but it would take a huge host to storm it. The garrison was constantly being deployed to fend off these raiders. The area was a near constant war zone. Hopefully, that would change with the victory against the Golden King. Ilam shook himself as he urinated onto the ground. I expected the walls to be bigger. You think? Gilorn chuckled. This is the closest we've ever been to it, or ever will be. Ilam pulled up his breeches slightly, as he'd lost his grip on them in the cold, or at least me. What do you mean? You're in the General's company, Ilam raised an eyebrow. As long as you're with the General, we'd be able to go anywhere, even the White City. That would be a sight, Gilorn nodded in wonder. Indeed. 1 arrow and you're in the General's bed. How fun your life must be. By the stewards, Gilorn laughed. You're jealous. Wouldn't you be? Oh, yes, I suppose, Gilorn replied. After a pause, he shook his head. But I won't be on my own. The General is bringing the whole army over the river. He'll be right by my side. Will I? Gilorn sneered. Then again, I won't need to worry about that. Chances are you won't even be able to get over the bridge. Well, at least I'll be in good company. And the General would be 15,000 men less off for it. Ilam finished urinating. He let out a long, satisfied gasp. God, I hate forced marches. Is there anyone who does like them? Gilorn asked. Ilam grimaced and returned to the original topic. The bridge was the border between the homeland and the colonial provinces, and the crossing of a colonial citizen into the kingdom heartland was forbidden unless they served some kind of purpose, such as trade or garrison duty. You're still a lowly Dacian, Ilam continued, despite your new rank. You're just like me. You can step 1 foot inside the Marble City and you'll be arrested and killed. No torture? Oh, the torture will come after you get killed. Indeed, Gilorn laughed. Have you been drinking that southern wine again? Ilam turned to face him, looking irritable. Do I honestly look like someone who can afford southern wine? Gilorn looked him up and down. Honestly? Ilam nodded. Well, Ranger Gilorn, a voice shouted behind them. Gilorn turned to face him. It was Flavor's squire, his sister's son. He was only 14, but he was dressed in ceremonial white robes of the Fountain Legion, a highly religious military group famed for their formation fighting. Yes, my lord? The consul demands your presence. Alan made a mocking sound. I do what he says. He's wearing robes. Don't be cruel, Gilorn said. What does he want? It doesn't concern me, the squire said sternly, giving a noble and austere look of irritability at Ireland. And it doesn't concern you either. Just come. I'll see you later. Gilorn nodded his farewell. Try to resist the urge to break into the city and get whipped again. All right, Alan nodded reluctantly. Any ideas where I can get something to eat here? He added to himself. Ranger. Camilla nodded to Gilorn when he arrived. My lord, he said to the boy, ruffling his hair. Do not touch me again, the boy grumbled, pushing Camille's hand away. Convincing, isn't he? Camilla smiled to Gilorn. I haven't pulled you away from anything important. Of course not, Gilorn shrugged. What do you need? We need you to gather your things and come to our camp. It'll be in the interest that you stick close for us over the crossing. Of course. Gilorn didn't need it to be explained, but Camilla told him anyway. Procedures need to be followed. When we cross the bridge and gather on the western shore, the army must set up camp. It won't be able to pass the villain wall, and only the general's company can pass, and word is sent from the eastern shore to the wall about who is in the company and who isn't. It will save us a huge amount of sweat and tears if you're with us at all times. Yes, sir, Gilorn said. This was proving Ireland right on all accounts. What? Nothing, sir. I'll report to camp. The crossing of the river was long and arduous. The bridge itself, which had been the symbolic pinnacle of all trade across the river for almost everything the kingdom required, was a crude, slim collection of timbers, and made any crossing for an army a terrible experience. Each contingent could only move across the bridge in lines of 5 each for infantry, 3 for cavalry, and 1 for the trebuchets. The bridge was designed so on purpose, to prevent the enemies of the kingdom from invading the Marble City. Gilorn was walking along Flavor's company. He was the only one who wasn't on a horse, and very conscious of being on the open edge. When they made it over the bridge, they proceeded through the city, being watched by its inhabitants. There were no cheers or cries of celebration as they passed, only empty stares. The streets were as narrow as the bridge, and there was no time to stop. I found more cheer in my mother-in-law when I said I was marrying her daughter, Gilorn smiled. You should have seen the look on my mother's face when I told her I was being inducted into the Citadel Guard, Camille smiled back. Why would they worry about that? Gilorn looked up at him on the horse. He didn't know anything about the ins and outs of high society. Camille snorted. Because I'm from nobility. Really? Gilorn looked him up and down. You don't look it. I'll take that as a compliment. Camille let out a singular laugh. All the members of the Citadel Guard are from nobility. He inclined his head slightly in deep thought. Well, some more than others. We're essentially chosen from the greatest families in the kingdom. He leant over and spat in disgust. Gilorn chuckled nervously. I thought nobility meant you dressed in fine silks and got fat and expensive foods. Oh, we do, Camilla nodded thoughtfully. It's tradition for every noble family in the Marble City to provide sons for politics, education, military leadership, and Citadel Guards. 4 of my brothers are in government, one of them in Citadel himself, and my father owns 15 farms in the hinterlands. So you got the job as Citadel Guard? Yes, Camilla nodded. He didn't say anything more until they passed a ruined tower next to the bridge, the Lunar Rim, the Tower of the Moon, which was built to perfectly track the moon as it rose and set in the night. My father decided he didn't want family legacy to be one of scholarship and walking around in a toga. I showed absolutely no sign of leadership when I was a child. I couldn't even order my own dog around. So, with military leadership out of the question, Citadel Guardsman was all was left. I'm quite grateful, though. Perfume stinks, I hate the stuff. I'm a soldier, not a leader. And yet you're the captain of the Citadel Guard. By virtue of rank, Camille said seriously, nothing else. I'm a captain because I'm able to kill things in battle quite well. He paused. And the man who would normally have been chosen are all dead. Oh, Gilorn paused awkwardly. Does that happen often? You don't think he's been assigned to me all his life, do you? Flavor said over his shoulder. Citadel Guards are simply assigned to a noble when they take the place in the Citadel. And when a lord or general gets killed, and the captain of his guard survives, that captain is then executed for negligence and murder. So in other words, Flavor said, if I die, he dies. Yes, Camille said with a long exhale. It's a full-time job. He never listens. They continued through the streets of the bridge city. It was a simple traversal through the straight passageways as the city was under a curfew to allow the army through. The loss of the market business would have been negligible to the governor compared to what Flavor had paid for the passage. Finally, they arrived at the gateway. Several soldiers were manning the walls. They turned away from the outer wall to look at the approaching army. "Who are they?" Gilorn asked, looking at the soldiers' huge halberds and unique heavy armour and their golden helmets. "The wardens of the Lunar Rim," Chimera nodded, or what's left of them. They all stood silently and vigilantly, not making a move. The only signs of life came from their hot steam escaping from their helmets as they breathed against the cold air. Fable bowed his head in respect and saluted with a fist against his chest, and then raised his hand up to them. They all thumped their halberds against the floor they were standing on, and swung them over their heads and sprang to a salute. Chimera chuckled. "The wardens like Flavor," he explained to Gilorn. When he stepped up to being the most powerful man in the kingdom, everything he said suddenly became his manifesto. "What do you mean?" Gilorn asked. Before rephrasing his question to a more poignant one, "Who are the wardens of the Lunar Rim?" Gilorn gave him a strange look, and then chuckled. "The Moon Tower. Back before the last exorcism, the Lunar Rim Citadel was run by the wardens, a bridge city legionary group. After the city was given over to the governor as part of a bribe, the order was discontinued. Aside from families who were already in it, these men are all that's left over the years. How many are there?" 50 or so, Chimera grimaced. They just stand there minding the walls, some on each side of the river. Some hire themselves out as mercenaries. I think we have 3 in this army. There used to be entire cohorts of them, now they're just gatekeepers. Such a waste." Gilorn grunted slightly, sharing Chimera's disappointment. "So why do they like the Consul?" "He wants to rebuild the Moon Tower," Chimera looked at Fable. "With the wealth he's gained over the years, he's got enough to rebuild it and fund an entire army of them 3 times over, but the bureaucracy of the capital is stonewalling him." "Why? What's with all these questions?" Chimera seemed to be getting tired of talking. Flavor chuckled. "Tell him, my friend. If he is to be my agent, then I want him well educated." Chimera grumbled, but nodded his acquiescence. "The populace of Rome are getting boisterous, and the general has been playing to their fears and wants. If he has an order like the Lunar Rim garrison on his side, he can make a lot of people very unhappy." "Don't forget my army," Flavor reminded him. "Yes," Turgon added, breaking from his long silence of drinking ale. "Mustn't forget the army, poor buggers. It's the only thing keeping you safe against Ignatius. Go back to your drink, my friend," Flavor said soothingly. "You make poor company when you're sober. I shall do my best to rectify that." Turgon apologized with a great waving of his hand. "Or you could just get drunk," Gilorn suggested. Flavor and Chimera both laughed. "I like him." Turgon leaned forward on his horse to be closer to Gilorn. "You can stay for now." "It's good to be told these things, isn't it?" Chimera smiled. Gilorn smiled back. He hadn't meant to say that, but talking had given him confidence. They crossed onto the bridge and set off along the highway. There was a large hill in front of them, blocking their view of what lay ahead. "So what else has the general promised?" Chimera laughed again. "You don't hear about these things in the woods," Gilorn shrugged. "I want to know." "I'd rather not say." Chimera leaned down to speak in an audible whisper. "Steward Ignatius wants Flavor to make some sort of political move, so he can openly move against him." "I don't understand." "You've arrived in the middle of a series of events. This isn't the kingdom that rules the world anymore." Chimera raised his eyebrows sternly. "There are vicious wolves in the capital. We may ride under the same banner, but we're more rivals than we are allies." "You talk as if civil war is on the horizon," Gilorn said, and when Chimera made no effort to reassure him, his spirit dropped. "Any chance I can withdraw my membership from your team?" "Your loyalty is inspiring," Chimera said, smiling and patting him on the shoulder. They reached the top of the hill, leaving the army to march along the road that snaked around it. They saw the glittering spires at the top, and then watched as the rest of the city and the mountains rolled out before them. It was all white marble, gleaming and shining in the sunlight. When the city had been first founded, it had been founded on a hill, where the main structure, the citadel, sat atop a vast pyramid. The rest of the city had been built in 3 giant square sections, one after the other. Each square district was bigger than the last, and each of them had their own set of fortress walls, ending with the giant walls that surrounded the city's outer defences. Against the eastern entrance, the one they were facing, was a massive irrigation farm that spread out for miles from the outer wall of the city. A much smaller wall, the villain wall, then enclosed the farmland, protecting it from raiders. It was big enough to house the entire army several times over. "Beautiful," Fable smiled. "Every time I leave, I fear I'll never see her again." "Every man in this army is here because of you," Chimera smiled, patting Flavor on the shoulder. Flavor was silent, but he nodded. He looked up at the tower at the top of the city. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He counted under his breath. There was a huge trumpet blast from the tower. He smiled. Right on schedule. At least now we have our invitation, Camille noted, jockeying his horse somewhat. So now what? Turgon asked, suddenly alive with seriousness. Set up camp by the wall, Favour ordered. The closer the better. We'll head into the city tomorrow. Shall I order the sergeants to prepare for disbandment? Camiran asked. Not until we've entered the city, Favour shook his head. We'll need it to protect from whatever Ignatius has planned. About time. Camiran clapped the hard leather of his saddle. Let's spring the steward's traps. I hate traps, Turgon muttered. Give me 500 men and I'll sort out all the problems in the city. Right, Camiran sneered. Let me know how that goes. Are you planning on marching the army straight to the gates themselves as well? I am no traitor, Favour reassured him. Not yet, anyway. The kingdom doesn't have the luxury of playing politics at this point. We need to be ready. How good of you, Camiran huffed. Let's hope it doesn't find you being hanged from the spire. What do you mean by that? Gilorn asked, as Turgon, Flavor, and the rest of the entourage rode off. His question went unanswered, and he was left to ponder alone at the top of the hill.